The dust-filled air swirled around Charlotte Dawson's trembling fingers as she clutched her father's will, the paper now damp with her tears. The lawyer had just informed her that somehow, overnight, the document had been altered. Her father's prosperous ranch, the Double D, no longer belonged to her but to her Uncle Victor, a man who had barely spoken 10 words to her father in the past decade. Wyoming Territory, 1878. Wheatland was still more a gathering of ambitious buildings than a proper town, but it had its share of laws that Charlotte was certain had been broken. How her uncle had managed to forge documents and bribe officials, while her father's body wasn't even cold in the ground, was beyond her comprehension. But the simmering anger in her chest told her she wouldn't accept this injustice lying down. "Miss Dawson, I understand this comes as a shock." Mr. Pemberton, the town lawyer, adjusted his spectacles nervously. "But the documents appear to be in order. Your father's signature—" "That is not my father's signature," Charlotte interrupted, her voice low but firm. At 22, she'd spent her entire life working alongside her father on the Double D. Every callus on her hands, every freckle on her sun-kissed face was earned through hard work and dedication to the land that should now rightfully be hers. "My father would never leave everything to Victor." "Never." Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat. "Regardless, the territorial court has already recognized the will's validity. I'm afraid you have until the end of the month to vacate the property." Charlotte stood so quickly her chair toppled backward, crashing against the wooden floor. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to leave the only home I've ever known. The lawyer wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Dawson. Unless you can prove the document is fraudulent, I will." Her voice didn't waver. "I most certainly will." Outside the law office, Charlotte blinked back tears as she untied her horse from the hitching post. The main street of Wheatland buzzed with the usual activity, the general store doing steady business, cowboys riding in and out, the saloon already filling with the day's first customers. None of them knew her world had just shattered. As she mounted her mare, a commotion down the street caught her attention. A man she'd never seen before was dismounting a magnificent chestnut stallion in front of the sheriff's office. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to handling himself in difficult situations. His dark Stetson shadowed features that seemed carved from the Wyoming landscape itself, all angles and rugged plains. When he removed his hat to enter the building, she caught a glimpse of sandy hair that the sun had lightened to the color of wheat. Charlotte wouldn't have given him a second thought on any other day. Wheatland saw its share of drifters and cowboys passing through, but something about his purposeful stride made her pause. He wasn't just passing through, he had business here. Shaking away her curiosity, she turned her horse toward home. She had 3 weeks to somehow prove that her uncle had stolen her inheritance. She didn't have time to wonder about strangers. The Double D spread out before her like a painting. As she crested the final hill, 5,000 acres of prime Wyoming grassland, dotted with fat cattle and bordered by the crystal waters of the Laramie River. The 2-story ranch house that her father had built with his own hands stood proud against the backdrop of distant mountains. This was her birthright, her legacy, her home. She would not let it slip through her fingers. Inside the house, she found Mrs. Abernathy, their housekeeper of 15 years, sitting at the kitchen table with red-rimmed eyes. "He's here," the older woman said simply. Charlotte didn't need to ask who he was. "Where?" "In your father's study, going through his papers like he owns them." Mrs. Abernathy's voice broke. "Which I suppose he thinks he does now." Taking a deep breath, Charlotte removed her riding gloves and hat. "Well, we'll just have to see about that." She found her uncle exactly where Mrs. Abernathy had said, seated behind her father's desk as if he belonged there. Victor Dawson had her father's height but none of his warmth. Where Daniel Dawson had been sun-bronzed and solid, Victor was pale and wiry, with cold eyes that had always reminded Charlotte of a snake's. "Ah, niece, I was wondering when you'd return." He didn't stand when she entered. "I trust Pemberton explained the situation." Charlotte remained in the doorway, refusing to step fully into what felt like enemy territory. "He explained that you've somehow managed to falsify my father's will." "Yes." Victor smiled thinly. "Serious accusations require serious proof, Charlotte. Something you don't have. My father would never have left everything to you. Everyone in this county knows that. And yet he did." Victor gestured to the papers spread before him. "The ranch, the cattle, the water rights all legally mine now. I'm not unreasonable, though. I'll give you until the end of the month to find other accommodations." "How generous of you," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with contempt. "And where would you suggest I go? This is my home." "Was your home," Victor corrected. "Perhaps you should consider marriage. A pretty girl like you could surely find some rancher willing to take you in. That's what women do, isn't it? Find a man to provide for them." The insult stung worse than if he'd slapped her. Charlotte had never been one to rely on others. Her father had raised her to be independent, to ride as well as any man, to understand the business of ranching, to stand on her own 2 feet. "I'll leave when hell freezes over," she said quietly. "Not a day before." Victor's smile vanished. "Don't make this difficult, Charlotte. I have the law on my side. We'll see about that." She turned to leave, then paused. "And stay out of my father's desk. Those papers don't belong to you." "Everything here belongs to me now," he called after her. But Charlotte was already striding down the hallway, her mind racing. She needed help, legal help beyond what Mr. Pemberton could provide. But lawyers cost money, and if her uncle had truly seized control of her inheritance, she had precious little of that. The meager savings in her personal account wouldn't get her far. As she stepped onto the porch, she noticed a group of ranch hands gathered near the bunkhouse. These men had worked for her father for years. Some had been with the Double D since before she was born. What would happen to them under her uncle's ownership? Charlotte squared her shoulders and walked toward them. If she was going to fight for the ranch, she would need allies. The men fell silent as she approached. Caleb, the foreman who'd taught her to ride her first horse, stepped forward. "Miss Charlotte, we heard about the will. Is it true?" "It's true that my uncle is claiming ownership, yes, but the will is a forgery. My father would never have left the ranch to Victor." The men exchanged glances. "What can we do to help?" Caleb asked. Charlotte felt a surge of gratitude. "For now, keep working as usual. I need time to figure this out. But I want you all to know I'm not giving up the Double D without a fight." "Neither are we, Miss Charlotte," said Tom, one of the younger cowboys. "Your pa was a good boss. Best I ever had." "Thank you." Charlotte fought back tears. "I can't promise you'll all have jobs when this is over, but I promise I'll do everything I can to keep the Double D in the right hands." As the men dispersed back to their duties, Charlotte turned to Caleb. "I need to find a lawyer, someone who specializes in contested wills, someone Victor can't buy off." Caleb scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Might be you should talk to Judge Wilson over in Cheyenne. He's honest as the day is long, and he knew your father well." "Cheyenne is 2 days' ride," Charlotte said, calculating. "I can't leave the ranch for that long with Victor here." "We'll keep an eye on things," Caleb assured her. "And on him." Charlotte nodded gratefully. "I'll leave at first light tomorrow." That evening, as she packed a small valise for her journey, Charlotte heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Peering out her bedroom window, she saw her uncle greeting a group of rough-looking men, 5 of them, all armed, none familiar to her. Her blood ran cold. These weren't ranch hands coming to work cattle. These were hired guns. The night passed slowly, with Charlotte barely sleeping. Before dawn, she slipped downstairs, leaving a note for Mrs. Abernathy explaining her plans. She was halfway to the barn when a voice stopped her. "Going somewhere, niece?" Victor emerged from the shadows, a rifle cradled in his arms. Behind him stood two of the men who'd arrived the previous evening. "I'm riding to check the north pasture," Charlotte lied smoothly. "The cattle need moving to fresh grass. At 4 in the morning." Victor's eyebrow rose. "I don't think so. I can't have you running off to stir up trouble. From now on, you don't leave the ranch without my permission." Charlotte's hands clenched at her sides. "You can't keep me prisoner on my own land." "My land," Victor corrected. "And I can do whatever necessary to protect my property." He gestured to the men behind him. "These gentlemen will ensure you understand that." Fear and fury warred within Charlotte. She was trapped. Any attempt to leave would likely be met with force, and she had no doubt these men would have few qualms about handling a woman roughly if ordered to do so. "Fine," she said, turning back toward the house. "But this changes nothing. The Double D will never truly be yours." For 3 days, Charlotte found herself virtually a prisoner in her own home. Victor's men watched the house constantly, and though they allowed her to move about the ranch, any attempt to approach the road leading to town was quickly intercepted. The ranch hands tried to intervene, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Victor had brought in more hired men, slowly replacing her father's loyal workers with his own people. Caleb and a few others remained, but Charlotte could see the strain in their faces as they were gradually pushed out of their positions. On the evening of the 3rd day, Charlotte sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset and trying to formulate a plan. The sound of an approaching rider drew her attention. Through the gathering dusk, she saw a lone horseman coming up the road, not one of Victor's men returning from town, but a stranger on an impressive chestnut stallion. As he drew closer, Charlotte recognized him as the man she'd seen in town the day she'd learned of her disinheritance. Up close, he was even more striking, lean but powerful, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, she noticed with a start, were an unusual shade of green, like the river in summer. He reined his horse to a stop and touched the brim of his hat. "Evening, madam. I'm looking for Charlotte Dawson." "You found her," Charlotte replied cautiously, aware that one of Victor's men was watching from near the barn. "And you are Luke Harrington." He dismounted in one fluid motion. "I believe we have some business to discuss." Before Charlotte could respond, the guard approached, hand resting on his holstered gun. "State your business, stranger." Luke Harrington turned, assessing the man with a cool gaze. "My business is with Miss Dawson, private business." "Nothing's private on this ranch anymore," Charlotte said bitterly. "Mr. Harrington, this is one of my uncle's men. He's here to ensure I don't leave or speak to anyone who might help me contest the will that robbed me of my inheritance." If her bluntness surprised Luke Harrington, he didn't show it. Instead, his eyes hardened as he looked back at the guard. "Is that so?" He turned back to Charlotte. "May I join you, Miss Dawson? I've ridden a long way." Charlotte nodded, indicating the space beside her on the porch swing. The guard hesitated, then stepped back, though he remained within earshot. "You'll have to excuse the unwelcome reception," Charlotte said quietly as Luke settled beside her. "Things have changed at the Double D recently, so I've heard." Luke kept his voice low. "That's why I'm here." "Judge Wilson in Cheyenne sent me." Charlotte's breath caught. "You've spoken with Judge Wilson?" Luke nodded almost imperceptibly. "He received your foreman's message. Caleb rode out 3 nights ago after your uncle's men fell asleep. The judge asked me to come assess the situation." Hope flared in Charlotte's chest. "Are you a lawyer, Mr. Harrington?" A slight smile crossed his face. "Not exactly. I work for the Territorial Governor's Office, Special Investigations." "A lawman," Charlotte breathed. "Of sorts." His green eyes scanned the property methodically. "I understand your uncle has taken control of your ranch through what you believe is a forged will." "I don't just believe it, I know it." Charlotte leaned closer, lowering her voice further. "My father's signature is wrong. The provisions are all wrong. My father would never have left me destitute." "I believe you, Miss Dawson, but believing isn't enough in a court of law. We need proof." Luke glanced toward the guard, who was trying and failing to appear as though he wasn't listening. "And it seems your uncle is determined to prevent you from finding that proof." "He has men watching me day and night. I can't even ride into town." Charlotte felt a surge of frustration. "He's going through all my father's papers, probably destroying anything that might help my case." Luke appeared to consider this. "Does your uncle know who I am?" "I doubt it." "We've never seen you before in Wheatland." "Good." He stood, stretching as if he were merely a traveler resting after a long journey. "Then I suggest you introduce me as an old friend of your father's just passing through, someone with no connection to your legal troubles." Charlotte studied him. "Why would you help me, Mr. Harrington? You don't know me." Something flashed in his eyes, determination, perhaps, or a personal understanding of injustice. "Let's just say I have a particular dislike for men who steal what doesn't belong to them." He offered his hand to help her up. "Now, shall we inform your uncle that he has a guest?" Charlotte hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His palm was warm and callous, the hand of a man who knew hard work, despite his official position. "I should warn you," she said as they walked toward the house. "My uncle is not a man to be underestimated." Luke's expression hardened. "Neither am I, Miss Dawson, neither am I." The introduction of Luke Harrington to her uncle went exactly as Charlotte expected. Victor was suspicious and unwelcoming, clearly unhappy about this new arrival whose purpose he couldn't immediately discern. "A friend of Daniel's, you say?" Victor's eyes narrowed as he examined Luke across the dinner table that evening. "Funny, he never mentioned you." Luke cut into his steak with perfect composure. "Daniel and I crossed paths several times over the years. Cattle business brings men together, then sends them in different directions." "And what brings you to Wheatland now, Mr. Harrington?" Victor pressed. "Just passing through on my way to Montana," Luke replied easily. "Thought I'd pay my respects to Daniel, only to learn of his passing. Miss Dawson was kind enough to offer me hospitality for the night." Charlotte admired his smooth delivery. Nothing in his demeanor suggested he was anything other than what he claimed, a traveling cattleman with loose connections to her father. "Well, you've caught us at an awkward time," Victor said with false regret. "I've only just taken ownership of the Double D, and we're in a period of transition." "So Miss Dawson explained," Luke said neutrally. "My condolences on your brother's passing. It must bring some comfort to know his ranch is in family hands." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed." "Though Charlotte is having some difficulty accepting the terms of her father's will." "Understandable," Luke commented. "It's hard to let go of what we believe should be ours." Charlotte bit her tongue at the subtle emphasis he placed on the word believe. He was playing his role perfectly, giving Victor no reason to suspect his true purpose. "You're welcome to stay the night, of course," Victor said, though his tone suggested the opposite. "But I'm afraid we have much to do here in the coming days. The ranch won't run itself." "Of course." Luke nodded respectfully. "I'll be on my way by morning." Later, as Charlotte showed Luke to the guest room, she whispered, "What now? If you leave tomorrow, how will that help me?" Luke checked that the hallway was empty before responding. "I'm not actually leaving. I'll ride out visibly, then circle back after dark." We need to search your father's study for evidence of the real will or anything that might prove your case. Victor keeps the study locked when he's not in there, Charlotte said. Luke's smile was confident. Locks aren't much of an obstacle in my line of work. And if we're caught, then I'll handle it. The certainty in his voice was reassuring. Get some rest, Miss Dawson. Tomorrow night we begin fighting back. The following day was one of the longest of Charlotte's life. She went about her routine helping Mrs. Abernathy with household chores, checking on the few remaining loyal ranch hands, avoiding her uncle as much as possible, all while counting the hours until nightfall. She watched with feigned sadness as Luke Harrington bid her farewell mid-morning, tipping his hat and riding off down the road toward town. Victor seemed pleased to see him go, retreating to the study with his account books immediately afterward. As dusk approached, Charlotte found herself growing increasingly anxious. What if Luke had encountered trouble in town? What if Victor's men caught him trying to return? What if they were caught searching the study? Her fears proved unfounded when, just after midnight, a soft tap came at her bedroom window. Charlotte jumped from her bed and hurried to open it, finding Luke crouched on the narrow ledge outside. "Mr. Harrington," she whispered, standing back to let him climb through. "How did you? Your trellis has sturdy roses," he replied with a hint of a smile, brushing dirt from his dark clothes. "Is Victor asleep?" Charlotte nodded. "He retired an hour ago. The house is quiet. Good. Let's move quickly." Luke produced a small leather case from inside his jacket. Tools of the trade. They crept silently through the darkened house, Charlotte leading the way to her father's study. The door was indeed locked, but Luke made quick work of it with his tools, the lock clicking open with barely a sound. "Keep watch in the hallway," he murmured. "Warn me if anyone approaches." Charlotte positioned herself near the door while Luke began methodically searching the study, using only a small covered lantern for light. He moved with quiet efficiency, examining the desk drawers, the bookshelves, even feeling along the edges of the picture frames. Nearly 20 minutes passed with Charlotte's nerves growing increasingly frayed. "Have you found anything?" she whispered. Luke was kneeling beside the large oak desk, running his fingers along the underside. "Not yet," but he paused, then she heard a faint click. Well, what have we here?" A small, hidden drawer had sprung open beneath the desk. Luke carefully extracted several folded documents and brought them to the lantern's dim light. "This appears to be your father's actual will," he said, after scanning the first page. "Dated 3 months ago and leaving everything to you, with provisions for the ranch hands' continued employment." Charlotte's heart leapt. "Let me see." She took the papers with trembling hands, immediately recognizing her father's distinctive handwriting and signature. "This is it. This is the real will. And there's more." Luke held up another document. "A letter from your father to Judge Wilson, explaining that he feared Victor might contest the will and detailing years of threats and attempts by Victor to gain control of the Double D." Charlotte felt tears of relief welling in her eyes. "This proves everything. Victor must have hidden these after she couldn't finish the thought. "After he what?" Luke asked, suddenly alert to her change in tone. Charlotte looked up at him, a terrible suspicion forming in her mind. "My father's death was ruled an accident. He fell from his horse while checking fence lines." She swallowed hard. "But he was the best horseman I knew, and his horse Thunder was the steadiest mount in the county." Luke's expression darkened. "You think Victor might have had something to do with your father's death?" It wasn't a question. The possibility had been nagging at Charlotte since Victor's arrival, but saying it aloud made it suddenly, terrifyingly real. "I think it's more than coincidence that my father died just when Victor needed him to," she whispered. Before Luke could respond, the floorboard in the hallway creaked. Charlotte froze, then peered cautiously around the doorframe. Victor stood in the hallway, a revolver in his hand, his face twisted with rage in the dim light. "I knew you were up to something," he snarled, advancing toward the study. "Step out where I can see you, Charlotte, you and whoever you're conspiring with." Charlotte met Luke's eyes, seeing him slide the documents into his jacket before drawing his own weapon. He nodded once, and Charlotte stepped into the hallway. "I found the real will, Uncle Victor," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And Father's letter to Judge Wilson. It's over." Victor laughed harshly. "Nothing's over until I say it is. Who's in there with you, that so-called friend of your father's? That would be me." Luke emerged from the study, his revolver trained on Victor. "I suggest you lower your weapon, Mr. Dawson." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You're no cattleman." "No," Luke agreed. "Special Investigator Luke Harrington, Wyoming Territorial Governor's Office. I'm placing you under arrest for fraud and potentially for the murder of Daniel Dawson." For a moment, Charlotte thought Victor might surrender. Then his expression hardened and he raised his gun. "Victor, don't!" Charlotte cried. Everything happened in an instant. Victor fired, the shot going wide as Luke tackled Charlotte to the floor. Luke returned fire as they fell, his bullet finding its mark. Victor staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, his gun clattering to the floor. The commotion brought Mrs. Abernathy running from her room, while outside, shouts indicated Victor's men were awakening. Luke moved quickly, securing Victor's weapon and binding his wound with a handkerchief. "Mrs. Abernathy," Luke said to the astonished housekeeper, "please fetch some rope. Mr. Dawson needs restraining until the sheriff arrives." "The sheriff won't help you," Victor spat through clenched teeth. "He's on my payroll." "Maybe so," Luke replied calmly, "but the territorial marshal isn't. And he'll be very interested in these documents." The next few hours passed in a blur for Charlotte. Luke sent one of her father's loyal ranch hands to fetch the sheriff, while he and the remaining hands disarmed and detained Victor's hired men. By dawn, the sheriff had arrived looking decidedly uncomfortable when confronted with Luke's credentials and the evidence they'd discovered. "I had no knowledge of any falsified will," the sheriff insisted, though his shifty gaze suggested otherwise. "That's a matter for the investigation to determine," Luke replied coldly. "For now, I'm placing Victor Dawson in territorial custody on suspicion of fraud and opening an inquiry into the death of Daniel Dawson." As Victor was led away, cursing and threatening, Charlotte finally felt the tension of the past days releasing. She stood on the porch, watching the morning sun illuminate her land once again. Luke joined her, his expression weary but satisfied. "It's not completely over," he cautioned. "There will be legal proceedings, testimonies required." "But the double D is mine again," Charlotte said, more a statement than a question. Luke nodded. "With the real will discovered and your father's letter to Judge Wilson, Victor has no claim." "The ranch is yours, Miss Dawson, as your father intended." Charlotte turned to face him fully. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Harrington." "Luke," he corrected with a small smile, "and you don't need to thank me. I was just doing my job." "Was it just your job that brought you all the way from Cheyenne? That made you risk your life climbing through my window in the middle of the night?" Something shifted in his green eyes. "Perhaps not entirely." Charlotte found herself studying his face, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the way the rising sun brought out golden highlights in his light brown hair. In the chaos of fighting for her inheritance, she hadn't allowed herself to notice how handsome he was. "Will you be leaving now? Returning to Cheyenne?" she asked, surprised at how much the thought disappointed her. Luke looked out over the ranch, considering. "The investigation into your father's death will take time. I'll need to question the ranch hands, examine where the accident occurred." His gaze returned to hers. "I could be in Wheatland for quite a while." Charlotte couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "In that case, Mr. Harrington, Luke, perhaps you'd consider staying at the Double D. We have plenty of room, and I'd feel safer with you here until everything is truly settled." "Are you offering me a job, Miss Dawson?" There was a teasing note in his voice that Charlotte found she liked very much. "I'm offering you a place to stay while you do your job," she clarified, though her tone matched his. "Though I suppose I could use some help getting the ranch back in order. Victor dismissed many of our best hands." Luke's smile deepened. "I should warn you, I'm a better lawman than a cowboy." "That's all right," Charlotte replied, suddenly feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "I'm an excellent teacher." The following days brought a flurry of activity to the Double D. With Victor and his men gone, Charlotte set about restoring order to her ranch. She rehired the loyal hands who had been dismissed, welcomed back those who had left rather than work for Victor, and began reviewing the account books to assess what damage her uncle had done in his brief tenure as owner. Luke established himself in a small office off the main house, conducting interviews and collecting evidence about both the forged will and Daniel Dawson's suspicious death. Each evening, he and Charlotte would share dinner, discussing the day's developments and planning for the next. Charlotte couldn't help noticing how seamlessly Luke fit into life at the Double D. He rose early without complaint, often joining the ranch hands for breakfast before beginning his official duties. Though he claimed limited ranching experience, he proved a quick study, helping with minor tasks when his investigation permitted. A week after Victor's arrest, Charlotte found Luke examining her father's horse, Thunder, in the corral. "Fine animal," he commented as she approached. "Doesn't seem the type to throw an experienced rider." Charlotte leaned against the fence beside him. "He's never thrown anyone in all the years we've had him." Luke ran a hand along Thunder's flank. "I spoke with Dr. Miller in town yesterday. He was the one who examined your father after the accident." And Charlotte held her breath, both wanting and dreading to hear what Luke had discovered. He noticed something odd at the time but didn't mention it since the sheriff ruled it an accident so quickly. Luke's expression was grim. "Your father had a small puncture wound on his leg. Dr. Miller assumed it was from striking something during the fall, but now he's not so certain." "You think he was stabbed?" Charlotte felt sick at the thought. "Not exactly." Luke turned to face her fully. "Dr. Miller believes it could have been caused by a spur driven deliberately into your father's leg to make Thunder bolt." Charlotte closed her eyes, picturing the scene. Her father, riding alone along the fence line. Victor, perhaps lying in wait, approaching as if for a friendly conversation before delivering a vicious kick that would startle both horse and rider. "Can you prove it?" she asked quietly. "I'm working on it. One of Victor's men, the youngest one, seems to be having a crisis of conscience. I'm hoping he'll testify about what he knows." Luke hesitated, then added gently, "Charlotte, if we can prove Victor had a hand in your father's death, he'll hang." The use of her first name didn't escape Charlotte's notice, but she was too focused on the implications of his words to comment on it. "Good," she said firmly. "If he killed my father, he deserves nothing less." Luke studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "I agree. Justice needs to be served." That night, a spring storm rolled across the Wyoming plains, bringing pounding rain and flashes of lightning that illuminated the ranch house in stark bursts of brightness. Charlotte sat in the parlor with a book she wasn't really reading, listening to the thunder and thinking about her father. Would he approve of how she was handling things? Of bringing in a lawman, of pursuing charges that might end with her own uncle's execution? Daniel Dawson had been a fair man, but also a firm believer in accountability. A knock at the parlor door interrupted her thoughts. Luke stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of steaming coffee. "Mrs. Abernathy said you might appreciate this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "She's turned in for the night." "Thank you." Charlotte accepted the coffee gratefully. "Please join me." Luke settled into the chair across from her, his long legs stretched toward the hearth where a small fire crackled. Outside, the storm continued its assault, rain lashing against the windows. "Penny for your thoughts," he said after a comfortable silence. Charlotte sighed. "I was thinking about my father, wondering if he would approve of what I'm doing, seeking justice for his death and protecting the ranch he built." Luke raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know your father, but that seems like something any man would want his daughter to do. It's not just that." Charlotte stared into her coffee. "It's the fact that it's Victor. They were brothers. Despite everything, they were family." Luke leaned forward, his expression serious. "Charlotte, Victor stopped being family the moment he decided your inheritance was worth more than your future. And if he had any part in your father's death, he stopped being human in my book." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "You speak like someone who understands betrayal firsthand." Something flickered in Luke's eyes, an old pain quickly masked. "Perhaps I do." Charlotte waited, sensing there was more he might say if given space to do so. After a moment, Luke continued, his voice softer. "My father was a rancher too, up in Montana. Smaller spread than this, but good land, good cattle. He had a partner, a man who'd been his friend since they were boys." He took a sip of coffee, his gaze distant. "When I was 16, that partner sold our water rights out from under us during a drought. My father confronted him and—" "He killed your father," Charlotte guessed when Luke fell silent. Luke nodded once. "Shot him during the argument, claimed self-defense. With no witnesses, he walked free. My mother and I lost everything: the ranch, our home, our livelihood." "What did you do?" Charlotte asked gently. "Survived. Worked any job I could find. Put my mother up in a small house in Helena. Then, when I was old enough, I joined the territorial lawmen." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Turns out I had a talent for investigating fraud and property theft. Cases like yours." Charlotte's heart ached for the 16-year-old boy who'd lost everything. "Did you ever find justice for your father?" "Eventually. 3 years ago, his partner finally confessed on his deathbed. Too late for a trial, but at least the truth came out." Luke met her eyes. "That's why your case matters to me, Charlotte. Because I know what it's like to have someone try to steal what your family built. And I know what it's like to suspect murder but be unable to prove it." Without thinking, Charlotte reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry about your father. And I'm grateful you're here to help me." Luke looked down at their hands, then turned his palm up to clasp her fingers gently. "I'm glad I can help. More glad than I expected to be, if I'm honest." The electricity between them had nothing to do with the storm outside. Charlotte felt her heartbeat quicken as Luke's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. For a moment, she thought he might lean forward, close the distance between them. Instead, he reluctantly released her hand and stood. "It's getting late. We both have an early start tomorrow." Charlotte nodded, simultaneously disappointed and relieved. Whatever was growing between them was complicated enough without adding the intimacy of a kiss in a darkened room during a thunderstorm. "Good night, Luke," she said softly. He paused at the doorway, looking back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Good night, Charlotte. Sweet dreams." The next morning dawned clear and fresh after the storm. Charlotte woke early, her dreams filled with green eyes and gentle hands. She dressed quickly in her riding clothes, determined to check the south pasture where the creek sometimes overflowed after heavy rain. As she descended the stairs, She was surprised to find Luke already in the kitchen, deep in conversation with Caleb. Both men looked up when she entered. "Morning," she greeted them. "You're both up early." "Got some news," Caleb said, his expression grave. "That young fella that worked for your Uncle Jimmy Tate, he was found dead in his room at the boarding house in town this morning." Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. "Dead? How?" Luke's face was grim. "Stabbed. The sheriff is calling it a robbery gone wrong, but you don't believe that," Charlotte finished for him. "Jimmy was supposed to meet me today," Luke confirmed. "He sent word yesterday that he was ready to talk about what he knew regarding your father's death." The implications were clear. "Victor has friends on the outside," Charlotte said quietly. "It appears so." Luke exchanged a look with Caleb. "Which is why we've decided to increase security around the ranch. Caleb's assigning men to patrol the perimeter, and I've sent for a deputy marshal to assist with the investigation." Charlotte nodded, appreciating their concern but unwilling to be cowed. "I still need to check the south pasture after the storm. The cattle, I've already sent Tom and Will," Caleb interrupted. "They'll report back by noon." "Charlotte," Luke added gently, "until we know who's working with Victor, it's safer if you stay close to the house." Part of her wanted to argue this was her ranch, and she wasn't about to be confined to the house out of fear. But the rational part of her understood the danger. If Victor's allies had killed Jimmy to silence him, they might well have similar plans for her. "Fine," she conceded. "But I won't be a prisoner in my own home forever. We need to resolve this quickly." "Agreed," Luke said. "The deputy marshal should arrive by tomorrow. With additional law enforcement present, we can move more aggressively on the investigation." Throughout the day, Charlotte found herself restless and on edge. The ranch house, usually a source of comfort, felt confining. By mid-afternoon, she had reorganized her father's business ledgers, drafted letters to several cattle buyers, and paced the length of the front porch too many times to count. Luke divided his time between writing reports for the territorial office and checking in with the ranch hands who were patrolling the property. Each time he returned to the house, his eyes sought Charlotte first, as if reassuring himself of her safety. As evening approached, Charlotte stood at the parlor window, watching the sun begin its descent toward the distant mountains. The day's inactivity had left her frustrated and tense. "Another hour and you'll wear a path in that rug," Luke commented from the doorway. Charlotte turned to find him leaning against the frame, a sympathetic smile on his face. "I'm not used to being idle," she admitted, "especially not when there's work to be done." "I understand." Luke crossed to stand beside her at the window. "But the work being done today is keeping you safe, and that's the most important task of all," Charlotte sighed. "I know, it's just, this is my fight, I should be doing something." Luke was quiet for a moment, then said, "Come with me, I have an idea." Curious, Charlotte followed him through the house and out to the barn. Inside, Luke lit a lantern and led her to an empty stall at the far end. "What are we doing?" Charlotte asked. In answer, Luke reached into his pocket and produced a small revolver. "If you're going to be in danger, you should know how to defend yourself properly." Charlotte frowned. "I know how to shoot. My father taught me." "A rifle for hunting, I imagine," Luke said. "This is different. A revolver for self-defense requires different skills." He held out the gun to her. "It was my mother's. Small enough for a woman's hand, but reliable." Charlotte took the weapon, feeling its unfamiliar weight. "Your mother's," Luke nodded. "After what happened to my father, I made sure she could protect herself." He positioned himself behind Charlotte, adjusting her grip on the revolver. "Hold it like this, firm but not tight." Charlotte was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arms around her as he guided her hands. His breath was warm against her ear as he spoke. "The key is to stay calm," he continued. seemingly unaffected by their proximity. Breathe steadily. Focus on your target. Charlotte nodded, trying to concentrate on his instructions rather than the way her skin tingled where they touched. We can't fire in here, Luke said, stepping back slightly, but we'll practice your stance and aim. Tomorrow, if it's safe, we'll find somewhere to try some actual shooting. For the next half hour, Luke coached Charlotte on proper handling of the revolver, how to check if it was loaded, how to aim quickly but accurately, how to maintain her balance when firing. By the time they finished, Charlotte felt more confident with the small weapon. Keep it with you, Luke said as they prepared to return to the house. Just in case. Charlotte tucked the revolver into her skirt pocket. Thank you for trusting me with this and for the lesson. Luke's expression softened. You're a quick study, Charlotte Dawson. I have a feeling you could master anything you set your mind to. The compliment warmed her more than it should have, including winning back my ranch and bringing my father's killer to justice, especially that. Luke held her gaze, his confidence in her evident. You're stronger than you know. In the lantern light, with shadows dancing across his features, Luke Harrington looked less like the formal investigator and more like the cowboy he'd pretended to be when they first met. Charlotte found herself wondering what it would be like to kiss him, to close the small distance between them and discover if his lips were as warm as his hands. As if reading her thoughts, Luke stepped closer. Charlotte, he murmured, his voice lower than before. The barn door creaked open, flooding the space with the last rays of sunset. They jumped apart as Caleb appeared in the doorway. Miss Charlotte, Mr. Harrington, you out here? Yes, Caleb, Charlotte called, hoping the dim light hid the flush she could feel on her cheeks. What is it? Riders coming. Looks like 3 men approaching from the east road. Luke was instantly alert. Friends or foes? Can't tell yet, Caleb replied, but they're moving fast. Luke turned to Charlotte. Stay here with Caleb, I'll see who our visitors are. No, Charlotte said firmly, drawing the revolver from her pocket. This is my ranch, I'll face whatever comes with you. For a moment, Luke looked like he might argue, then his expression shifted to one of respect. All right, but stay behind me until we know who they are. They hurried to the front of the house, arriving just as 3 riders thundered into the yard. The lead horseman was a stocky, official-looking man with a thick mustache and a silver badge pinned to his vest. Deputy Marshal Garrett Cooper, he announced as he dismounted. I believe you were expecting me, Harrington. Luke relaxed visibly. You made good time, Cooper. Got your message about the Tate boy, Cooper replied grimly. Figured it couldn't wait. He nodded respectfully to Charlotte. Miss Dawson, I presume. Marshal's office extends our sympathies for your situation. Charlotte acknowledged him with a nod as the other 2 men dismounted. They were younger, both wearing deputy badges as well. These are Deputies Reynolds and Miller, Cooper introduced them. Good men, both of them. And more importantly, men I trust completely. Appreciate you coming so quickly, Luke said. Let's get inside and I'll bring you up to speed on what we know. As the group moved toward the house, Charlotte caught Luke's eye. He gave her a reassuring smile, and she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. With 3 more lawmen on their side, perhaps they could finally bring Victor to justice, not just for the fraudulent will, but for her father's murder. The arrival of the deputy marshal and his men changed the atmosphere at the Double D. Their presence provided not only additional security, but also a sense of momentum in the investigation. Cooper was a seasoned lawman with a reputation for thoroughness, and he immediately set about re-examining every aspect of the case. The following morning found Charlotte, Luke, and Cooper gathered in her father's study, surrounded by documents and maps of the ranch. Jimmy Tate was killed to silence him, Cooper said, summarizing what they knew, which means Victor Dawson has at least one accomplice still free. The sheriff is the obvious suspect, Luke added. He was quick to rule Daniel's death an accident and seemed very uncomfortable when I took Victor into custody. Cooper nodded thoughtfully. Sheriff Holloway has always been for sale to the highest bidder, but he's not the type to do his own dirty work. He turned to Charlotte. Miss Dawson, can you think of anyone else who might have been close to your uncle? Anyone who visited him during his brief time here at the ranch? Charlotte considered the question carefully. There was one man, a lawyer named Simmons from Laramie. He visited twice, spent hours closeted with Victor in the study. Elliot Simmons, Cooper's eyebrows rose. Interesting. He's got a reputation for representing clients with flexible ethics. Could he have helped forge the will? Luke asked. Possibly. Cooper made a note in his small book. I'll have Reynolds ride to Laramie today to look into Simmons' movements. There's something else, Charlotte said, a memory surfacing. The night before my father's accident, I overheard him arguing with someone outside the barn. It was dark, and I couldn't see who it was, but the next morning I noticed fresh tracks from a horse I didn't recognize. Luke and Cooper exchanged glances. Could it have been Victor? Luke asked. Charlotte shook her head. The voice wasn't his. And anyway, Victor made a point of never visiting the ranch while my father was alive. They hadn't spoken in years. A messenger, then, Cooper suggested. Someone delivering a threat or ultimatum from Victor. Or someone working with Victor to plan Daniel's murder, Luke added grimly. The investigation continued throughout the day, with Cooper questioning the ranch hands about what they recalled from the days surrounding Daniel Dawson's death. By evening, they had constructed a more detailed timeline, but were still missing crucial pieces of evidence. After dinner, Charlotte excused herself to the porch, needing a moment alone to process everything. The weight of the day's discussions, the clinical dissection of her father's final hours had left her emotionally drained. She didn't hear Luke approach until he spoke softly from behind her. Are you all right? Charlotte turned, offering him a tired smile. Just needed some air. It's difficult hearing everyone discuss my father's death so dispassionately. Luke nodded in understanding. I know. I felt the same way during the investigation into my father's death. He joined her at the porch railing, their shoulders almost touching. It helps to remember why we're doing it. For justice, Charlotte said quietly. For justice, Luke agreed. And so you can truly reclaim what's yours without looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Charlotte was acutely aware of Luke beside her. His steady presence had become a comfort she hadn't expected, but now relied upon more than she cared to admit. Cooper seems confident we'll build a strong enough case, she said finally. He's good at what he does, Luke affirmed. Between his resources and what we've already discovered, Victor won't escape justice. Charlotte turned to face him fully. And after that? What happens when the case is closed? The question hung between them, layered with meaning that went beyond the legal proceedings. Luke's expression softened as he met her gaze. After that, he said carefully, I'll need to return to Cheyenne to file my final reports. I see. Charlotte tried to keep disappointment from her voice. Of course he would leave. His job here was temporary, a professional assignment rather than a personal commitment. But, Luke continued, taking a half step closer, once my duties are complete, I would very much like to return to Wheatland. If I had reason to do so. Charlotte's heart quickened. What sort of reason would be compelling enough to bring you back? Luke's hand came up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. I think you know, Charlotte. This time, when he leaned toward her, there was no interruption. His lips met hers in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened as Charlotte responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. Luke's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss continued, sweet and unhurried. When they finally parted, Charlotte was breathless, her cheeks flushed. Luke kept his arms around her, his expression a mixture of wonder and contentment. "I've been wanting to do that since the night of the thunderstorm," he admitted with a smile. Charlotte laughed softly. "I've been wanting you to do that since the same night." "Is that so?" Luke's smile widened. "And here I was, trying to maintain professional distance." "Very professional," Charlotte teased, her fingers lightly tracing the collar of his shirt. "Is that why you've been finding excuses to teach me to shoot and check on me a dozen times a day?" "I was concerned for your safety," Luke defended, though his eyes sparkled with humor. "Of course you were." Charlotte smiled up at him, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "And I appreciate your concern." Luke's expression grew more serious. "Charlotte, I want you to know this isn't just—" He paused, searching for words. "What I feel for you isn't simply a result of the circumstances. It's real. And it's something I'd like to explore further once all this is resolved." Charlotte's heart swelled at his sincerity. "I'd like that too, Luke. Very much." He bent to kiss her again, a gentle promise of things to come. Neither noticed Deputy Cooper watching from the window, a knowing smile beneath his mustache as he quietly withdrew to give them privacy. The following days brought significant developments in the investigation. Deputy Reynolds returned from Laramie with evidence that Elliot Simmons had indeed been involved in creating the forged will. Under questioning from Cooper, Simmons broke quickly, confessing that Victor had paid him handsomely to produce the document and backdate it. More importantly, Simmons revealed that Victor had been planning to take control of the Double D for months. He had accumulated gambling debts that threatened to ruin him, and saw his brother's prosperous ranch as the solution to his financial troubles. "But did Simmons know anything about my father's death?" Charlotte asked when Cooper relayed this information. "He claims not," Cooper replied. "Says he was only involved in the will forgery, not any plan to harm Daniel." "Do you believe him?" Luke asked. Cooper stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "I do, actually. Simmons is a corrupt lawyer, but I don't think he has the stomach for murder. Besides, the timing doesn't work. According to him, Victor only approached him about forging the will after Daniel was already dead." "So Victor didn't plan to kill my father initially," Charlotte said slowly. "He just seized the opportunity when the accident happened." "Or," Luke suggested, his expression grim, "he caused the accident when another opportunity presented itself." The breakthrough they needed came from an unexpected source. 3 days after Simmons' confession, a ranch hand named Pete Morgan approached Charlotte after dinner. "Miss Charlotte," he said nervously, twisting his hat in his hands, "there's something I need to tell you about the day your pa died." Charlotte exchanged a quick glance with Luke before leading Pete into the study where Cooper was working. "What is it, Pete?" The young cowboy shifted uncomfortably. "I should have said something sooner, but I was scared, after what happened to Jimmy Tate." "You're safe here," Luke assured him. "Whatever you know, we need to hear it." Pete took a deep breath. "The day Mr. Dawson died, I was checking fences about a half-mile from where they found him. I saw 2 riders meet up near the North Ridge, your pa and another man." Charlotte leaned forward. "Did you recognize the other man?" Pete nodded reluctantly. "It was Hank Miller." Cooper's head snapped up. "The sheriff's deputy." "Yes, sir." Pete looked miserable. "They seemed to be arguing. I was too far away to hear, but there was a lot of arm waving. Then Deputy Miller rode off, and your pa continued along the fence line toward the east pasture." "Where he was later found," Luke murmured. "Did you see Deputy Miller again that day?" Cooper asked. Pete shook his head. "No, sir. But about an hour later I heard a shot. Thought it was someone hunting, maybe. Then one of the other boys came riding hard, saying Mr. Dawson had been found thrown from his horse." Charlotte's throat tightened. A shot. My father wasn't shot. No, Luke said thoughtfully, he wasn't. But a gunshot near a horse would be enough to startle it badly. Cooper was already on his feet. I need to speak with Deputy Miller immediately. He turned to Pete. Would you be willing to testify to what you saw? The young cowboy straightened his shoulders. Yes, sir. Mr. Dawson was always good to me. He deserves justice. After Pete left, Charlotte paced the study, her mind racing. Hank Miller and Victor, it makes sense now. Victor wouldn't come to the ranch himself. He and my father hadn't spoken in years. But he could send Miller to deliver threats or demands. And when Daniel refused, Luke continued the thought, Miller took matters into his own hands. The question is whether Miller acted on Victor's direct orders or took initiative on his own, Cooper added. Either way, I'm bringing him in for questioning tonight. Cooper and his deputies rode into town immediately, leaving Luke to organize additional security at the ranch. The possibility that they were closing in on Daniel Dawson's killer had everyone on edge. Charlotte found herself unable to sleep that night, her mind filled with thoughts of her father's final moments. Had he known what was happening as his trusted horse panicked beneath him? Had he realized in those last seconds that his own brother had orchestrated his death? When dawn finally broke, Charlotte gave up on sleep and made her way downstairs. To her surprise, Luke was already in the kitchen pouring coffee. You're up early, she said, accepting the cup he offered. Never went to bed, he admitted. Cooper sent word an hour ago. They've arrested Deputy Miller. Charlotte's heart raced. Did he confess? Not yet. But they found evidence in his home letters from Victor promising him a position as foreman of the Double D once Victor took control. Luke's expression was grim but satisfied. Cooper thinks Miller will break under questioning, especially now that Victor is already in custody and can't help him. So it's almost over, Charlotte said, the realization bringing both relief and a strange emptiness. The fight for justice had consumed her for weeks. Its resolution would leave a void. As if sensing her thoughts, Luke reached across the table to take her hand. The legal proceedings will take time. The trial, the formalities of officially returning the ranch to your name. But yes, the worst is over. Charlotte squeezed his hand gratefully. Thanks to you. Luke shook his head. I just helped uncover the truth. Your courage in fighting for what's rightfully yours is what made the difference. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You're quite remarkable, Charlotte Dawson. The warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. Over the past weeks, amid danger and determination, something precious had grown between them, something Charlotte wasn't ready to lose. What happens now? She asked softly. With us, I mean. Luke's expression grew serious. That depends on you. As I said before, once my official duties are complete, I'll need to return to Cheyenne temporarily. He paused, then continued more hesitantly, but I've been thinking. The territorial office has been wanting to establish a permanent presence in this region, someone to oversee investigations in Wheatland, Laramie, and the surrounding areas. Hope blossomed in Charlotte's chest. And you'd be interested in such a position. Very interested, Luke confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. Especially if it meant I could be near a certain ranch owner I've grown quite fond of. Charlotte couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. I think that ranch owner would like having you nearby. Luke's answering smile was warm and full of promise. Then I'll speak with the governor when I return to Cheyenne. The kitchen door swung open as Mrs. Abernathy entered to start breakfast. She paused briefly at the sight of them holding hands across the table, a knowing smile crossing her face before she discreetly busied herself at the stove. Charlotte reluctantly withdrew her hand, but the connection between them remained, a tangible current of understanding and affection that had only grown stronger through their shared struggles. By mid-morning, news arrived from town. Deputy Miller had confessed. Under Cooper's relentless questioning, he admitted to meeting Daniel Dawson on Victor's behalf, delivering an ultimatum that Daniel sell the ranch to Victor to cover his gambling debts. When Daniel refused, Miller reported back to Victor, who then ordered him to create an accident that would remove Daniel from the picture permanently. Miller described how he had followed Daniel later that day, fired a shot close to Thunder's head, and then watched as the startled horse bolted, throwing Daniel against a rock outcropping that broke his neck. The deputy's confession implicated Victor fully as the mastermind behind the murder. "Both men will hang," Cooper informed them grimly when he returned to the ranch that afternoon. "The territorial judge is already on his way from Cheyenne. Given the severity of the crimes and the clear evidence, the trial will be expedited." Charlotte received the news with a complex mixture of emotions: relief that her father's killers would face justice, sorrow at the confirmation of her uncle's treachery, and a strange emptiness now that her fight was nearing its end. That evening, as the ranch settled into an uneasy calm, Charlotte stood at her father's grave on the small hill overlooking the Double D. The simple wooden marker bore his name and the dates of his birth and death, with the words "beloved father and rancher" carved beneath. "It's almost over, Pa," she said quietly. "They'll pay for what they did to you, and the Double D is safe now, still in Dawson hands, just as you wanted." The sound of footsteps behind her announced Luke's approach. He stood quietly beside her, respectful of her private moment. "I was telling him about Victor and Miller," Charlotte explained, "and that the ranch is secure." Luke nodded. "He'd be proud of how you fought for it, and for him." "I hope so." Charlotte gazed out over the sprawling ranch, the cattle dotting the green pastures, the buildings her father had constructed with such care. "I used to think I was fighting just to keep what was rightfully mine, but it's more than that now. It's about honoring what he built and building on it further." "What do you see for the future of the Double D?" Luke asked, genuinely interested. Charlotte smiled, warming to the subject. "Expansion, for one thing. The Carson property to the south is available, good water rights, excellent grazing land, and I've been corresponding with a breeder in Texas about improving our stock." She glanced at him. "Ambitious plans for a woman alone, some might say." "Some might," Luke agreed, "but not me. I think you're more than capable." He paused, then added more softly, "Though you don't have to be alone in those ambitions if you don't want to be." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat at the implication in his words. "What exactly are you saying, Luke Harrington?" He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I'm saying that in the short time I've known you, Charlotte Dawson, I've come to admire you more than any woman I've ever met. Your strength, your determination, your kindness." His voice grew softer. "I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, and that nothing would make me happier than to build a future with you here at the Double D, if you'll have me." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She had known their feelings were growing deeper, but hadn't expected such a declaration so soon. Yet as she looked into Luke's earnest green eyes, she knew with absolute certainty that what was between them was real and lasting, forged in the fire of shared purpose and mutual respect. "Luke," she began, her voice steadier than she expected, "when my father died and Victor tried to steal my inheritance, I thought I'd lost everything. But meeting you, it's like finding something I never knew I was missing." She squeezed his hands. "I'm falling in love with you too. And yes, I want you here with me, not just to help with the ranch, but to share it, to build something together." The joy that transformed Luke's face was worth any uncertainty, any risk. He pulled her gently into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. Charlotte melted against him, all the tension of the past weeks dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally parted, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you," he said with a hint of a smile. "I know more about tracking criminals than breeding cattle." Charlotte laughed softly. "Lucky for you, I know plenty about cattle, and I suspect your other skills will come in handy too. Wyoming territory isn't exactly tame yet." "A perfect partnership, then," Luke murmured, his arms still around her waist. "The rancher and the lawman." "I like the sound of that." Charlotte glanced back at her father's grave. "I think he would have approved of you, you know. He always said character matters more than circumstances." "High praise," Luke said sincerely. "I wish I could have known him." "Me too." Charlotte took a deep breath, feeling a new sense of peace settle over her. "But I think he'd be happy knowing the Double D will continue with both of us guiding it." As the sun began to set over the Wyoming plains, casting long shadows across the land that had nearly been stolen from her, Charlotte felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. The future stretched before her not without challenges, but full of promise. With Luke by her side and justice for her father within reach, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings. The trial of Victor Dawson and Hank Miller was swift and definitive. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Miller's confession, Simmons' testimony about the forged will, the financial records showing Victor's desperate need for money, and the letters between the two conspirators outlining their plan. Charlotte testified about her father's relationship with Victor and the sudden appearance of the forged will after Daniel's death. Her testimony was clear and compelling, earning her sympathetic looks from the jury and respectful nods from the territorial judge. Luke's professional testimony about the investigation carried significant weight, his methodical presentation of evidence leaving no room for doubt about the defendant's guilt. Throughout the proceedings, his supportive presence gave Charlotte strength when painful details of her father's murder were discussed. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge sentenced both men to hang for the murder of Daniel Dawson, with the execution set for 1 month hence. As they left the courthouse after the sentencing, Charlotte felt a curious emptiness where her anger and determination had been. "It's over," she said quietly as Luke helped her into the buggy for the ride back to the ranch. "They'll pay for what they did." "Does it bring you peace?" Luke asked gently. Charlotte considered the question. "Not peace exactly, but closure perhaps." She looked across at him. "Now I can focus on rebuilding without always looking over my shoulder." "And I'll be with you every step of the way," Luke promised, taking her hand. The formal transfer of the Double D back to Charlotte's ownership took place the following day. Mr. Pemberton, the town lawyer who had initially informed her of the forged will, seemed eager to make amends for his part in the deception, offering to waive his fees for handling the paperwork. "That's not necessary," Charlotte told him. "You were deceived as much as I was." Pemberton looked relieved. "You're generous, Miss Dawson. Your father would be proud of how you've handled this difficult situation." As they signed the final documents, Charlotte felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The Double D was officially hers again, her home, her legacy, her future. Luke had ridden to Cheyenne after the trial to meet with the territorial governor and submit his final reports on the case. He returned 3 days later, his face alight with good news. "It's done," he announced as he dismounted in the ranch yard. "The governor has approved the establishment of a regional law enforcement office in Wheatland, with me as the chief investigator." Charlotte couldn't contain her joy, rushing to embrace him regardless of the ranch hands watching with knowing smiles. "So you're staying?" she asked, her hands gripping his arms. "I'm staying," Luke confirmed, his eyes warm with promise. "Permanently." That evening they celebrated with a special dinner prepared by Mrs. Abernathy, who had taken an immediate liking to Luke and made no secret of her approval of the match. Caleb and several of the senior ranch hands joined them, raising glasses to the future of the Double D and its owner's newfound happiness. As the weeks passed, Luke divided his time between establishing his new office in town and helping at the ranch. He proved a quick study in ranching matters, his analytical mind well suited to understanding the business side, while his physical strength made him an asset during roundups and cattle drives. Charlotte found herself falling more deeply in love with him daily, appreciating his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, and the gentle way he supported her without trying to take control. The ranch hands accepted him readily, respecting both his badge and his willingness to work alongside them without pretension. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, Luke took Charlotte's hand. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice unusually hesitant. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. Luke smiled. "Perhaps." He turned to face her fully. "Charlotte, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Finding you, helping you reclaim your inheritance, falling in love with you, it's more than I ever expected when I rode into Wheatland." Charlotte's heart quickened as she recognized the seriousness in his tone. "They've been the happiest of my life too, Luke, despite everything else that happened." Luke took a deep breath. "I know it might seem soon, but I've never been more certain of anything." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I love you, Charlotte Dawson. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you fight for what's right and never back down from a challenge." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life by your side, building a future together here at the Double D?" Tears of joy filled Charlotte's eyes as she looked from the ring to Luke's hopeful face. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Luke Harrington, I will marry you." His face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the last rays of the setting sun. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "My mother insisted I bring it when I told her about you." "You told your mother about me?" Charlotte asked, touched. Luke nodded. "In great detail. She can't wait to meet you, says any woman who fought as hard as you did for her inheritance must be someone special." "I look forward to meeting her too," Charlotte said sincerely. Luke drew her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Charlotte rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When should we marry?" she asked. Luke considered. "The fall cattle drive will be done by early October. How about the last Saturday of the month? That gives us nearly 2 months to prepare." "Perfect," Charlotte agreed. A fall wedding at the Double D. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Wheatland. The townspeople had followed the dramatic story of Charlotte's fight for her inheritance and her father's justice, and most were delighted by the romantic conclusion to the tale. Mrs. Abernathy immediately appointed herself wedding planner, her organizational skills proving as valuable for this event as they were in running the ranch house. As the wedding date approached, Charlotte found herself busier than ever. Between the fall roundup, preparations for the cattle drive, and wedding arrangements, her days were filled from dawn to dusk. Luke was equally occupied, establishing his new office and training deputies, to help cover the expanded territory under his jurisdiction. Yet despite their busy schedules, they made time for each other every day, often riding together at sunset to discuss their plans for the future. Luke had moved into one of the small cabins on the ranch property, a temporary arrangement until after their wedding when he would join Charlotte in the main house. One evening, 2 weeks before the wedding, they rode to the ridge overlooking the Carson property that Charlotte had mentioned wanting to acquire. "What do you think?" she asked as they surveyed the rolling grassland. 4,000 acres, good water, connects perfectly with our south pasture. Luke nodded appreciatively. "It's excellent land. Have you made an offer?" "Not yet." Charlotte turned to him with a smile. "I wanted your opinion first. It would be our first major decision together." The significance of her words wasn't lost on Luke. "Our first of many," he said warmly. "And I think it's a sound investment. The Double D needs room to grow if we're going to build the legacy you envision." "That we envision," Charlotte corrected. "This will be our ranch, Luke. Equal partners." Luke took her hand, his expression serious. "I want you to know something, Charlotte. I never want you to feel that I'm trying to take control of what your father built. The Double D is your birthright. And I'm choosing to share it with you," Charlotte said firmly. "Not because I need a man to run it, but because I love you and want to build something together." Luke's smile was tender. "I love you for that, and for so many other reasons." As they rode back to the ranch house in the gathering dusk, Charlotte reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few months. From the devastating loss of her father, and the threat of losing her inheritance, to finding love and expanding her vision for the future, it was more than she could have imagined when she first clutched that forged will in trembling hands. The weeks before the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. Charlotte's wedding dress arrived from Denver, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that Mrs. Abernathy pronounced absolutely perfect. Luke's mother traveled from Montana for the occasion, a gentle woman with her son's green eyes and quiet strength, who embraced Charlotte like the daughter she'd never had. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cool, with the aspen trees on the surrounding hillsides blazing gold against the blue Wyoming sky. Charlotte stood at her bedroom window, watching as ranch hands and townspeople arrived, filling the yard with buggies and horses. A large tent had been erected near the barn, tables set up for the celebration that would follow the ceremony. A soft knock at the door announced Mrs. Harrington. "May I come in, dear?" "Of course." Charlotte welcomed her future mother-in-law with a smile. Mrs. Harrington crossed to the dressing table where Charlotte's wedding attire was laid out. "I brought something for you," she said, opening a small pouch and withdrawing a delicate silver hairpin adorned with tiny pearls. "I wore this at my wedding and my mother before me. I thought perhaps you might like to wear it today." Tears pricked Charlotte's eyes at the gesture. "I would be honored," she said sincerely, as Mrs. Harrington helped Charlotte dress. She spoke of her own wedding day, of the years she had shared with Luke's father, and of her hopes for her son's happiness. "Daniel would be so proud of you today," she said as she carefully pinned Charlotte's hair. "Not just for how beautiful you look, but for the strength you've shown these past months." Charlotte blinked back tears. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." When Charlotte descended the stairs an hour later, Caleb waited to escort her to the ceremony. The old foreman looked uncharacteristically polished in his best suit, his gray hair neatly combed. "Miss Charlotte," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you look just like your mama on her wedding day." Charlotte smiled at the highest compliment he could give her. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything, for standing by me through all of this, and for standing in for my father today." Caleb offered his arm. "It's my honor, Miss Charlotte. Your pa would be mighty proud of the woman you've become." Outside, the ranch yard had been transformed. A flower-covered arch stood before the backdrop of rolling hills and distant mountains. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, filled with friends, neighbors, and ranch hands in their Sunday best. At the arch stood Luke, handsome in a new black suit, his face lighting up as Charlotte appeared on Caleb's arm. The love in his eyes as she walked toward him made her heart swell with joy and certainty. The ceremony was simple, but meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising not just love and fidelity, but partnership and mutual respect. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Luke's kiss was tender and reverent, sealing their union as their assembled friends cheered. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. There was feasting and dancing, speeches and toasts, laughter and a few happy tears. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the yard, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Luke pulled Charlotte away from the festivities for a quiet moment alone. "Happy, Mrs. Harrington?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Charlotte replied truthfully. "And you, complete," he said simply. His eyes, reflecting the lantern light, held nothing but love and contentment. "You know, when I first rode into Wheatland, I was just doing my job investigating another case of fraud and property theft. I never expected to find the other half of my soul." Charlotte leaned into his embrace. "And I never expected that losing my inheritance would lead me to something far more valuable." "We should thank your uncle," Luke teased. "Without his villainy, we might never have met," Charlotte laughed. "I wouldn't go that far. But I will say this: fighting for what was rightfully mine brought me more than just the ranch. It brought me you, and for that, I'll always be grateful." As they rejoined their guests for the final dances of the evening, Charlotte looked around at the ranch that had almost been stolen from her. The Double D was more than just land and cattle now. It was the foundation of a new beginning, a legacy that she and Luke would build together. In the years that followed, the Double D flourished under their joint stewardship. The Carson property was just the first of several expansions, making the ranch one of the largest and most successful in the territory. Luke continued his work with the territorial law enforcement, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity that matched his skills as an investigator. Their first child, a son they named Daniel after Charlotte's father, arrived a year after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, who inherited her father's striking green eyes. As the children grew, they learned the ranch business from both parents, absorbing Charlotte's knowledge of cattle and Luke's analytical approach to problem-solving. The story of how Charlotte fought for her inheritance and found love in the process became something of a legend in Wheatland. Newcomers to the area would inevitably hear the tale of the determined young woman who refused to be cheated of her birthright, and the lawman who helped her bring the culprits to justice. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Luke surprised Charlotte with a special gift: a new sign for the ranch entrance. Where it had once read simply Double D Ranch, it now proclaimed Dawson Harrington Ranch, ESD, 1853. "To honor both our contributions," he explained as they stood before it. "Your father's legacy and our future." Charlotte leaned against his shoulder, watching their children playing nearby. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Everything is perfect," and it was. The ranch that had almost slipped through her fingers had become the centerpiece of a life richer than she could have imagined, filled with love, family, and the satisfaction of building something lasting together. What had begun as a desperate fight for justice had become a journey to happiness, proving that sometimes losing what you thought you wanted could lead you to what you truly needed.